Arietta's father introduces the family to a new slave, number 11542, who will now live with them. The heroine recognizes the slave as Lord Edwin, whose face she saw in her dreams every night, although she could not admit it to herself. 2 years ago, Arietta is bored on the balcony during the ball and looks at the starry sky. The girl reaches out her hand to the brightest star and thinks that she only has 15 days left to hold out here. Arietta was flooded with memories of her homeland, the village of Filioche, her aristocratic parents, and her dislike of etiquette. Mom scolds the little heroine for her dirty dress and shoes, because the girl has only a year left before her debut, and she needs to take care of her appearance. Due to inappropriate behavior, the girl was sent to Aunt Lillian in Levant. Arriving at her aunt, Arietta was afraid of not getting along with her because they had never met before. Surprisingly, the aunt greeted the heroine with great hospitality. She was delighted to meet her niece. As it turned out, the reason for such hospitality was that Aunt Lillian liked to select lord husbands for her niece at various events. Arietta returns from the balcony and meets an excited aunt who is looking for a girl to introduce to someone. The heroine is introduced to the Countess of Welsh and her eldest son Derek, who also came to the celebration. Derek asks the girl how she is living with her aunt and asks if Arietta really sings well. The girl sees Derek's disappointment after he found out that the heroine sings without education, for herself. Arietta thinks that she did not live up to the guy's expectations because she is from the village, and the aristocrats are unlikely to accept her so easily. The heroine wants to come up with some excuse and leave, but Lord Welsh does not listen to her, but is distracted by the whispers around her. Arietta and Derek turn to the source of the noise. The guy asks if Redford has arrived. People in the crowd exclaim and admire. A commotion begins. The host of the celebration thanks Lord Edwin for his visit. The heroine makes her way through the people to see the culprit of the commotion and freezes from embarrassment caused by the beauty of the Lord. A blue-eyed blonde man in a tailcoat appears before the girl. The girl thinks that he is divinely handsome. Edwin walks forward and locks eyes with Arietta, causing her to become very embarrassed. Out of surprise, the girl gets tangled in her dress and falls at the feet of the Lord, thinking that she looks like an idiot. Lord Edwin asks if everything is all right, and then kneels in front of the heroine and offers a helping hand to help the girl up. Arietta hesitates, afraid that the guy will mock and despise her, like Derek recently, but still accepts help and gets up from the floor. After providing assistance, Lord Redford coldly walks past the girl as if nothing special had happened. Arietta is faced with the image of the guy's emotionless face. She thinks that it is better to be ridiculed than to feel so insignificant. The heroine suddenly turns around and calls out to the Lord, who did not have time to hide in the crowd of guests. Aunt Lillian pulls the girl back, diverting the crowd's attention from the scene. The aunt grabs the heroine by the face and asks if she is okay, how she fell to the floor, and that the girl's disappearance has embarrassed Countess Welsh and her son. Arietta does not listen to her aunt, only asks who the tall blonde man was who helped her get to her feet. Lillian tells her niece that the guy is Lord Edwin, and there is no need to have meaningless feelings for him, because there are plenty of girls like her. The aunt tells of the ancient family of the Redfords, the most distinguished and powerful family in the kingdom, and are the most distinguished family in Brimdell, after the royal family. Lord Edwin is the heir of this family, and all in his family are talents, widely known for their skills, not just their wealth. Arietta is the daughter of a viscount from the wilderness, no match for the excellent future Duke of Blue Blood, and should not even speak to him, because even among aristocrats there is a hierarchy. The heroine asks her aunt who should be her mate then, an unknown nobleman or an old count, in order to correspond to the hierarchy. Arietta reasons that she can still have a dream and go towards it, despite prejudices about who is compatible with whom and who is not. Aunt apologizes and leaves, saying that aspirations are good, but there are goals that cannot be achieved with any perseverance. The girl remembers the Lord and does not believe that he is truly unattainable, like the stars in the sky. The aunt says that she will support her niece in everything, and even if the girl is a naughty rebel, she will always be a precious niece. Arietta cries in front of her aunt, thinking about Lord Edwin, and realizes that she will no longer be able to forget him. Lillian calms the girl down, saying that the world is full of people more beautiful than Lord Edwin, and she herself thinks that her niece will soon forget him. Arietta is traveling in a carriage with her aunt to the next event, who wonders why her niece has not yet left for Filioche, because she so wanted to go home, and her mother is already waiting. Lillian asks if her niece is waiting for Edwin to leave Levante to return home, because she so wants to see him. The heroine says that she actually saw the Lord after that fateful evening. She did not wait behind the Marquise's house, as her aunt suggested, but she actually saw him. albeit from a distance. Arietta again remembers the day she met Edwin. It was the day of her debut as an adult, although she does not even remember the name of her escort. Since then, the heroine has attended every ball to meet the Lord again, but not a single attempt has been successful. Having learned that Edwin often visits the Marquis of Richcanel, the heroine came to his estate to try her luck again. The heroine wondered if she looked suspicious at the gate, and if the Lord would come here today, if she should just return. The clatter of hooves is heard, and a luxurious carriage quickly passes in front of the girl's face, heading to the estate. Arietta catches a glimpse of the Lord's outline in the carriage window, his blonde hair and tailcoat. The heroine is surprised and happy. She finally saw Lord Edwin. Her journey was not in vain. The aunt stops the girl's story and reminds her that she cannot be with him, and the pain and depression she went through are meaningless. Arietta also wants to leave these feelings. She understands how reckless and ignorant she looks, and that she will not be able to reach someone so far away. However, the girl's emotions are not listened to, and on the contrary, intensify, which only worsens her situation. Soon after this, it became known in the city about the engagement of the heir of the Duke of Redford and the daughter of the Marquis of Richcanel. Now it became clear why the Lord was away from the capital for so long, and why he so often visited the house of the Marquis, whose family was also outstanding. Everyone blessed their marriage, except Arietta, who had no choice but to cry day and night. Aunt Lillian reported the girl's condition to her mother, who came to take the girl back to Filioche. The heroine's mother hugged her daughter and said how much they all missed her, especially Hugo. Arietta remembered Hugo, her younger brother, who was very attached to her. When the brother accompanied the girl to Lavant, he made her promise to write to him about this city and her life in it. The heroine clung to her mother and burst into tears because memories of her brother awakened her feelings of love and homesickness. Arietta thought that her first love, although strong and awkward, ended with a deep scar on her heart until the Lord appeared in her life again. The heroine sits at a table in her estate and reads a letter that recently arrived in the mail and is amazed at the contents. Suddenly, a joyful Hugo runs into her room and calls his sister. The girl gets scared, crumples the letter, and shouts at her brother to knock before entering, and thinks that he wasn't so obnoxious before. Hugo asks about the letter in the girl's hand, but does not want to read it, because he thinks that Aunt Lillian always writes the same thing, that she wants to come to Filioche. The brother reminds the heroine that she promised to teach him how to ride a horse without a saddle, and suggests starting today because the weather is great. Arietta reminds the boy that she is under house arrest for breaking a window while testing a new bow. The girl asks her brother for forgiveness and promises that she will teach him everything he wants when everything is settled. The heroine invites Hugo to teach him how to hunt hares with a bow, because he has long wanted to learn how to shoot. The boy makes his sister promise and says that he is very glad to walk with her again, like in the past. The heroine recalls that her aunt told her that time heals, and all the girl's sadness and depression will pass over time. Arietta realizes that she has found a way to get out of the hole of her feelings, and her heart is healed. The heroine understands that this is reminiscent of the past days, when Lord Edwin left a small but noticeable mark on her heart. At dinner, Arietta's mother asks if the girl wants to return to Levante because her aunt misses her. Mom also reminds that social events and balls will begin soon, at which it would be nice to keep Lillian company. The girl picks at her food and reminds her that she returned only a month ago and wants to spend time in Filioche. Arietta's mother offers her daughter to go for just a month because she is already 17 and needs to think about her plans for the future, about her engagement. The heroine says that she is not going to get married now, but her mother suggests that she just take a closer look at potential partners. Hugo hears the horses and realizes that his father has arrived, from whom there has been no news for a long time. The father of the family is commanding the servants unloading the cart when he notices his joyful children and wife running towards him. Arietta and Hugo giggle at their cooing parents, who are bored and giving in to the feelings that have accumulated during the separation. The father is in no hurry to enter the house. He first wants to introduce someone, after which the clanging of shackles is heard. The father introduces the family to slave 11542 and says that he will live in their house. Hugo notices the shock on his sister's face and asks if she's okay. The heroine has a floating image of a blonde slave before her eyes, and she vaguely hears her family calling her by name. The girl remembers the morning letter, which spoke about a strange rumor that had spread throughout the kingdom. Arietta wakes up and remembers her strange dream with Lord Edwin. The girl tosses and turns in bed, enjoying the fact that she dreamed of the guy in the form of a slave and looked different from how she remembered him. The daydream was interrupted by Hugo, who brought the girl tea with honey and jam and asked if she was okay. although the girl was surprised that he came to see her so early in the morning. Hugo says that it is not morning, but evening, and she fell asleep after losing consciousness. Arietta takes tea from her brother and asks if she really fainted and wasn't asleep. The girl realizes that her father really brought Lord Edwin home as a slave. It was not sweet dreams. The heroine bursts into her father's office and asks why Lord Edwin is in Philiotia and not in the capital, and why he looked so bad. The father is perplexed about which lord she is talking about, and why she calls slave 11542 by name. The heroine's father explains that slaves have serial numbers and are called by them. Arietta explains that the slave is Lord Edwin, heir to the dukedom of Redford, but his father only laughs because 11542 was sent to him by his friend as a thank you for his service. To convince his daughter that he is right, the father gives her a document tied with a ribbon. The girl looks at the letter with the royal seal and the author's slave document and realizes that they are genuine. The father tells Arietta that she is not yet fully rested and wishes his daughter a good and sound sleep at night. The girl asks who gave Edwin as a gift and finds out that it is the Marquis McKnight, who owns large property near the capital and is an influential person in the kingdom. Arietta remembers how she saw the lord passing by her in a carriage, what feelings she experienced, and thinks what in this world happened to Lord Edwin. For several days, the girl tries to approach the slave and watches him from behind the haystacks while the guy sweeps the ground. The heroine is afraid that she left a bad impression of herself, so she is afraid to talk directly with Lord Edwin about their meeting in the past. Arietta freezes in fear when Hugo puts his hand on her shoulder and asks what her sister is doing. Hugo asks for forgiveness for scaring him, and the girl begs to be quiet so that Edwin does not notice them. The guy still notices them and turns towards the noise. The girl understands that she can't get away with it, and now she has to have the conversation that she so wanted, but was afraid of. Hugo doesn't understand his sister's reaction, but chalks it up to the fact that she hit her head when she fainted. The boy turned around and noticed the slave from whom Arietta was hiding, and she was afraid of his further reaction. Hugo ran out of hiding and ran to the slave because he just wanted to talk to him, and the heroine did not have time to stop her brother. The boy, although he was half the size of the slave, arrogantly asked what he was doing here. The slave did not answer, only looked down at the boy. Hugo asked with dissatisfaction, confident that the guy heard everything perfectly. The boy looked up and saw how empty and cold the slave was looking at him. Hugo trembled with fear, his confidence and resolve gone. The slave finally said that he was working, and Arietta, looking out from the shelter, thought that her brother looked like a frightened puppy. Crossing his arms, Hugo asked how the slave was given the room allocated to him, since it used to be a training room. Edwin remembered a beautiful but simple room, in which there was a sofa and an inconspicuous bookcase. Hugo blushed in surprise when the slave said that the room was ordinary. Arietta, watching this, remembered that this room was her brother's favorite. Hugo shouted at the slave, because usually people like him are not given a room at all, and you shouldn't behave so impudently, regardless of the quality of the place in which he was previously. The heroine ran out to her brother to stop him and ordered Hugo to apologize to the guy. The boy is perplexed and does not understand why he should apologize to the slave. On the contrary, he should ask for forgiveness. Arietta worships Edwin and asks for forgiveness for her brother, saying that he is good, just small. Hugo yells at his sister for bowing to a slave, because if their father sees him, he will be very angry. The heroine shouts back that her brother simply doesn't know who this guy is, and denies that he is 11542's slave. The girl wants to tell Hugo who Edwin is, but she is stopped by thoughts about whether she can tell her about this, since according to the documents he is really a slave. Suddenly, Edwin greets Arietta and says that they have not seen each other for a long time. The guy says that this is the first time they have seen each other since he helped her last time. Arietta is flattered that he also remembers their meeting and remembers that scene at the event a year ago. Edwin interrupts the girl's dreams by saying that he remembers their meeting a few days ago, when he first arrived in Philioche. Arietta is embarrassed by what she thought to herself, and by the fact that Edwin's first memory of her is of her fainting. Edwin says that it was he who carried her to her chambers, because he was the only one at that moment who could do it. The heroine lowers her head and says in disappointment that she confused him with someone, and they really haven't met before. Edwin looks up at the girl and tenses, because he doesn't want anyone to recognize Lord Redford in his slave guise. The guy sees the girl smiling, thanking him for his help, and says that he is indebted. Even though Edwin says that helping is just part of his job, the heroine asks to let him know if she can provide any service. The guy wants to ask if the girl knows his case, and is already starting to talk when Arietta interrupts and says that she needs to run to her mother. Hugo asks if her mother really called her, because she is not at home, but his sister shuts him up, pinching his hand. The girl calls her brother with her, and they run away, leaving the slave to finish the work, but he looks after them in a stupor. Edwin continues to look after the girl with disgust, fear, and anger, now confident that she knows him. Arietta looks into the backyard, expecting to see Edwin there, but does not find the guy and goes to look elsewhere. The girl looks around, looking out for the guy, and someone approaches her from behind. The stranger scares the heroine by putting his hand on her shoulder, and the girl screams as she was concentrated on the search. The girl runs away in fear, sees the slave she was so diligently looking for in the yard, and accidentally calls him Lord Edwin. The guy asks for forgiveness, saying that the girl could have fallen. That's why he approached her so unexpectedly. Arietta is flattered and blushes, saying that the guy scared her, but she's okay. Edwin politely asks if the lady was looking for anyone, but she says that she was just taking a walk and decided to go into the yard. The heroine notices that despite the guy's politeness, an oppressive atmosphere emanates from him. It seems to her that she needs to leave, otherwise something bad will happen. Arietta quickly passes the guy and says that she will not continue to interfere with his work. The slave stops her by grabbing her hand, which greatly frightens the girl, who already had a bad feeling. Without letting go of his hand, Edwin asks, slightly embarrassed, if the heroine knows him while she is trying to break free. The heroine trembles and denies acquaintance with the Lord. The girl becomes scared that there is no one nearby. Edwin asked again, squeezing the girl's hand harder, but she also denied everything. Arietta screams for the guy to let her go, and with a strong jerk pulls her hand out of captivity. From a sharp push, the girl falls to the floor, red marks left on her wrist from Edwin's strong fingers. The heroine, still sitting on the floor, rests her hands on it and trembles, trying to find words. Arietta looks up at Edwin, gets up from the floor, and admits that she knows that he used to be a nobleman, Lord Redford. The girl boldly looks at the slave and asks what he will do now with this information. The guy, in a stupor, realizes that his guesses were correct, and his past is known to Arietta. Edwin asks how she found out about him, because in Philiotia they are not so interested in the outside world if someone told her. The guy asks another question about whether anyone other than the girl knows who he is, to which he receives a negative answer. The girl moves back while Edwin advances and says that at first he did not trust the one who sent him here, asking about the ulterior motives of this person. In the end, the girl finds herself pinned against the wall, with no way to escape from the approaching slave. The guy stops and asks with a grin if the heroine wants him to crawl like a dog in front of her. Edwin keeps asking if he can get high and satisfy Arietta's desires until she understands what he means. The slave completely pressed the lady against the wall, took her chin, and asked her to stop shaking in order to attract him. The heroine continues to tremble and says that she does not understand what the guy is talking about. Edwin reaches out to her so close that it's easy to kiss her and asks her to choose more effective drugs, because, although under their influence everyone looks the same, the heroine is not his type. Arietta forcefully pushes the guy away and yells at him to stop talking about such things. The girl is terrified, shaking and asking what such a terrible thing the guy wanted to do to her. Edwin is surprised that the heroine continues to play at innocence. He does not understand why she reacts so strongly. Arietta begins to cry and asks what happened to the highest noble she knew. Sobbing, the girl wonders why Lord Edwin became what he is now, a frightening, perverted slave. The guy thinks and wonders how he became a slave, what happened to him, and tells his story. Edwin remembers the rich woman who held him, beaten and in rags, and enjoyed how long she held him. The hero remembers how his father was cut off by a guillotine, and how this woman said that it was hilarious. Sitting on his knees, chained, Edwin awaited his fate in horror. The guy was sweating profusely, and then he heard a voice calling his name and saying that Edwin must continue to live. The hero remembers the prince who told him to live and repent of the actions of his family, to suffer for their unerasable sin against the kingdom, because this is the only thing he can do now. After being accused of treason, all people with the surname Redford were destroyed, except Edwin. The guy was saved due to many factors, one of which was his close friendship with the prince. Sitting tied up, on his knees in front of the prince, the hero asked why he was saved, begged him to kill him. The prince, who had been looking out the window before, finally turned and said that Edwin should strive for life. He explains that Edwin's death should be the end of the Redford family's history. Edwin hears from a once good friend that the Redford family wanted him to choose this path, the path of redemption. So the hero lost his rank and his last name. He no longer existed as a lord. The guy changed his name to 11542, the date of the beginning of his new life. But even then, he was not sure of the correctness of his actions. It seemed to him that life was eating him up inside and out. When Edwin was heir to the dukedom, people showed him nothing but smiles. The moment the hero became a slave, the same people changed instantly, attacking him. The mental exhaustion and physical pain were not as difficult as the humiliation and coldness that Edwin felt. Every day, the guy dreamed of taking revenge on these people, who turned out to be worse than cattle, but more often he wanted to kill himself. The prince's words about the Redford's duty to the kingdom often appeared in Edwin's head. They penetrated his head like a curse. Over time, the former lord no longer understood who was to blame, the people or him, and confused thoughts forced him to resign himself to fate. Edwin ended his story by saying that if people wanted to destroy his soul, then they succeeded. He almost forgot who he was before. The hero sees Arietta crying in front of him, and doubts creep into his head that she is one of those rotten people. Having finally gathered herself, the girl says that she saw Lord Edwin at a ball in Levant. The heroine says that the guy shone brighter at the ball than anyone she has met in her entire life. Thanks to him, the girl realized how strong, beautiful, outstanding, unprecedented a person can be. Arietta concludes that the guy was more wonderful than a star falling from the night sky. She could not forget her amazement at the first meeting. And no one at that time would argue that Lord Edwin was worth all these feelings, praise, because he was wonderful. Arietta says that she knew from her aunt that he had been having some problems lately, but before they met, she was sure that everything was fine with the Lord. Edwin looks at the girl's sincere gaze and realizes that she was not watching him because she had a hidden plan. The guy froze and realized that the girl simply had a genuinely pure heart. She never wanted him harm. Edwin looks down in shame and realizes how much he was rude to her recently, with words about pleasing him and using him like a dog. The guy looks at the lady and thinks that the girl now hates and despises him, but she has the right to this. He must bear any punishment. Suddenly, the girl worships Edwin and says that she is sorry for acting like that. Edwin is very surprised and waits for what she will say next. He is still waiting for a reaction to his rudeness. Arietta cries without raising her head and apologizes for thinking he was living a happy life and not knowing the pain he went through. The girl is crying because she thought Edwin was living well, and she was the one who found herself in a cruel reality when she knew nothing. The lady asks for forgiveness from the bottom of her heart, and the slave thinks that she has no reason to do this. Arietta cannot stop crying, because what they did to Lord Edwin is very cruel. All the people told Edwin that he deserved all his torment, and he didn't even know why they were doing it. Therefore, now the hero is amazed that an unfamiliar girl is crying so much because of him. Edwin continued to watch as Arietta burst into tears, covering her mouth with her hands. During the day, there were several good stallions in the stable, one of which was being looked after by Arietta. The girl looked in surprise at her brother who entered the stable, who could not say whether he came to the stable alone or with someone. Hugo slowly approaches his sister, who is brushing her horse and does not understand what the boy is talking about. The brother shows himself and says displeasedly that the slave has begun to stand out more often lately. Arietta really sees Edwin behind her and understands that he arrived recently because she did not see him when she arrived. In order not to disturb her brother, Arietta returns to the horse and says that Hugo has made up his mind. Because they have a small house, it would be strange not to meet so often. Hugo glances sideways at the slave and says that this is not an accident because he was watching the slave. The boy says that he sees the guy only when he is with Arietta, and when he is alone, he does not catch his eye. Hugo proves that even the place where Edwin is now cleaning was already cleaned by the maid Anna. The land is clean. The heroine thinks that she also suspected that the slave was interested in her, and her brother only fueled her imagination. To definitely convince her brother that he was wrong, the girl says that Edwin was simply asked to clean there again. Arietta began to avoid the guy after their conversation, but not because she didn't like him. The girl was afraid that he might be uncomfortable with her. The heroine thought so because Edwin had already suffered bullying and violence before coming to them, and she hoped to stay out of his sight to make it more comfortable. Hugo still had his doubts, but his sister threatened to leave him at home if he didn't stop talking nonsense. The brother and sister rode out of the stable on horses. The heroine ordered Hugo to obey her, otherwise she would not take him with her. Arietta reasons that Hugo is still a child, because he is only 10 years old, and for her it will always be that way. The rider was passing by the slave when she saw that he had stopped his work and was looking at her carefully. The girl smiled awkwardly and bowed, thinking that he was looking at her like that because he had never seen her in riding clothes before. The heroine did not stay long and rode with her brother on horseback towards the forest to begin the riding lesson. Edwin looked after them thoughtfully, upset that he did not have time to say anything. Hugo, on a rearing horse, was chasing a forest white rabbit towards his sister. The rabbit actually ran to Arietta, who had already prepared a bow and arrows for him. The heroine took the arrow and, saying that she was a good shooter, pulled the string. The girl carefully took aim at the fast-running target and lowered the arrow towards the rabbit. The arrow hit right in front of the animal, and it ran away. The girl thought that the arrows were too old for a good hunt. Hugo quickly rode his horse after the rabbit to guide it towards his sister. She hurried after him. Arietta shouted to her brother not to ride alone, but the boy did not hear, and the girl simply chased the horse. The heroine noticed that they had gone too far into the forest and invited her brother to return to the edge. The girl saw where her brother's horse was rushing and shouted for him to stop, but Hugo did not hear. Finally, the boy turned around and asked his sister what the problem was, why she was screaming so much. At that time, the rabbit fell into a large hole that Hugo did not see. Hugo did not have time to stop the horse, and it rushed right after the rabbit into the cliff. Arietta urged her horse faster towards her brother, a plan ripening in her head. Having caught up with her brother, the girl pushed her brother's horse and fell from the horse into the pit instead of him. Hugo was horrified by what had happened and did not know what to do now. Arietta flew into a deep hole right in front of and behind him. Hugo called his sister from the pit, but the girl lost consciousness from a blow to her head. The boy, with tears in his eyes, hears that his sister is making sounds and is happy that she began to make sounds. Arietta holds her head with her hand and thinks that the silt in the hole softened her fall well. Having come to her senses, the girl jumps up and shouts to her brother that it will not be good for him when she gets out, because he did not listen to her, and Hugo is ready to do anything to ensure that his sister gets out of the hole in safety. The heroine examines the hole and realizes that the ground is soft due to the recent rain, and it will not be possible to get out easily. Arietta tells her brother that she needs tools to climb, like ropes, or in extreme cases, stems or vines. Hugo looks around, but finds nothing. His sister reasons that the vines won't support her weight anyway, and his brother won't be able to hold them. The heroine invites Hugo to return to the village and bring ropes, or call one of the people for help. Hugo says that it will be dangerous for his sister to remain alone in the forest, and it is better for him to stay. Arietta scares her brother that if nothing is done, they will both be eaten by local wolves at night. Hugo is afraid, but still leaves towards the village in order to return with help before late. The girl hears a noise nearby, and leaning on the wall of the pit, hopes that it is not her father who will come with Hugo. The heroine takes a step and feels pain in her ankle, remembering that her parents are not interested in her entertainment outside the home. If the parents find out what today's outing led to, they will take away her bow and arrows because they want more feminine hobbies for their daughter. In the end, the girl sits on the ground and realizes that in this position, she has no choice. Her gaze falls on the rabbit sleeping next to her. The girl did not believe that she was in such trouble because of the little rabbit. Time passed. Arietta was shivering from the cold and hoped that Hugo had reached the village without problems. Although the village is close to the forest, finding the way can be difficult, and although Hugo acts older than his age, he is just a boy. The heroine represents ferocious wolves because recently one villager was attacked by a pack. More time passed, the girl was frozen and was even more worried about her brother and herself. Arietta heard a rhythmic noise from above, like a horse galloping through the grass. The heroine was glad that the people brought by her brother had finally arrived, and began to call Hugo so that she could be found quickly. Screams came from the pit, but there was no reaction. In the empty forest, there were no more extraneous sounds at all. The girl was upset that the sounds were apparently made by some animal, and no one came to save her. Arietta took off her gloves and rolled up the sleeves of her suit, deciding that she could no longer sit around doing nothing. Alternately sticking sticks into the soft soil of the pit walls, the girl quickly rose to the top. Already seeing the top of the pit and the forest, Arietta was glad that she never lost. When the heroine was almost out, the stick under the girl's foot broke off and she flew down. Arietta screamed as she fell and despaired of getting out of this terrible pit. The girl's hand was caught by a strong man's hand from somewhere above and stopped the girl's fall. The girl opened her eyes, raised her head, and was surprised to see her savior. The assistant turned out to be Lord Edwin and said that he would answer all the lady's questions later. The guy says that he will now pull the heroine out and lifts her out of the hole. While the girl is trying to catch her breath, Edwin is nearby asking if the lady is injured. Arietta is still surprised and asks how the slave knew that she fell into the hole, and the slave says that Hugo told him about the trouble. The girl is relieved that her brother has reached the village safely and is not injured. Edwin puts a saddle on the lady's horse and says that they need to get home quickly because it will soon get dark. The guy notices that the girl is limping on one leg while walking to the horse. Edwin asks why the heroine did not say that she was injured when he asked about it. The hero comes closer to Arietta and sits down in front of her feet. The slave takes off the lady's high boot and examines the girl's turned-up swollen leg. Arietta is embarrassed. Her heart beats even faster because it still remembers her feelings for the Lord. The heroine screams because Edwin is squeezing her leg too much, but the guy can't do anything because her ankle is swollen. The guy concludes that the bones are intact, but the ankle is sprained. The lady needs to rest and stop overworking herself. After the girl says that Edwin is not a doctor and cannot be sure, the guy looks up and says that he has seen enough of such minor injuries. The couple heads towards the village. Arietta sits on a horse, and a slave leads her by the team. Both heroes break the silence by starting to say something at the same time, and Edwin convinces the lady to speak first. Arietta smiles and thanks the guy for today, and for his help in their first meeting. The lady says that she is embarrassed to thank him so often, but she is very obliged to him. The girl claims that the slave can ask for her help, despite the fact that she has no influence or physical strength. Edwin asks if the heroine always puts herself in danger, and receives the answer that Arietta simply loves outdoor activities, unlike the young ladies from the capital. The guy stops when the girl asks what he wanted to ask when they interrupted each other. Seeing the slave's embarrassment, Arietta convinces him that it is not necessary to tell if it is difficult for him. Edwin turns shyly and asks if the heroine is angry about the day he was rude to her, and if she feels uncomfortable seeing him. The guy says he wants to apologize to the lady properly while she sits on her horse in a stupor. The slave convinces Arietta that he leaves it to her to accept his apology or not, and he will understand if she is disgusted. He thinks he deserves to be hated for all his mistakes, and he will stay out of her way if the lady wants him to. The girl interrupts Edwin and says that she doesn't understand what the guy is talking about and why she would want him to avoid her. The guy says that she herself did not want to see him in recent days, and he decided that she was against him being around. The heroine appears because the slave did not understand her intentions at all. She thought that, on the contrary, he was uncomfortable with her, so she kept her distance. Edwin is sincerely surprised and does not understand why she thought so. What actions of his contributed to this? The slave tells the lady that she was completely wrong about his feelings. Arietta lights up and asks what the guy means by, of course he was uncomfortable, or of course she was wrong about it. Edwin clutched the reins in his hands and said that he himself was not sure what was in his head, and remembered how Hugo discussed him in the stable. The heroine puts her hand to her mouth and asks if Edwin was sad, because he thought that she was avoiding him. The slave turns away and responds briefly in the negative, but still does not give a reason. The already cheerful Arietta continues to suggest that the guy wanted to find out what she was thinking and ask for forgiveness, but Edwin denies everything. The girl, smiling, looks down at the guy and thinks that she was right after all. From the back, she can see the slave's ears, red with shame, which show all his deception. Autumn and winter passed, and finally spring came again to Filyosh to refresh nature before the hot summer. A joyful Arietta leans out of the window of the house and waves her hand, greeting Edwin. The guy is amazed, and the girl's father shouts at her not to do that because it's dangerous. The heroine says that she will come down to them now, and Edwin continues to look at her with embarrassment. While the slave is working, Arietta hangs around behind him and asks if he wants to talk to her. The lady pulled the guy by the edge of his vest so that he would finally pay attention and asked him to look at her. Edwin turns around and asks if Arietta has 10 lives. The guy says that the girl must have many lives if she constantly takes such risks by jumping out of the window. Arietta tries to convince him that she is not little and nothing will happen to her. She didn't fall out of the window. Edwin shakes her head and reminds her of how she got lost in the forest, fell off her horse while jumping from the saddle, and cut her finger trying to cut vegetables faster. The heroine admits her guilt and the guy's rightness, and promises to be more attentive. The guy reminds her how many times she promised, and the embarrassed lady says that she will be very careful. The slave thinks that she will still get into trouble because of her habits, not today or tomorrow. The guy remembers her sweet face on a horse ride and realizes that he is letting the girl go with impunity. Arietta enthusiastically asks if Edwin is still angry with her, asking her to say that she is forgiven. The hero tenderly says that he believes her, but he himself thinks that it is impossible for him not to fall for his little deceptions. At dinner, Arietta and Hugo secretly fight over the last piece of bacon on the table. The heroine's concentration is interrupted by her father, asking where she has been since he doesn't see her in the house. The girl brushes off that she was at home all the time and didn't do anything special. The father notes that this is strange because the only time he sees her is during meals. Hugo, who stole the coveted bacon, says that his sister spends time in a certain place in the house. The boy cuts bacon, telling the family that Arietta spends time in the stables or warehouse, places where her father does not go. The heroine's mother asks if she still communicates with 11542 and receives a positive answer. The woman says that her daughter should communicate less with the slave, but the father notices that 11542 is still good. The father says that the slave's words are surprisingly polished, and he looks bright, and regrets that such a person was born a slave. Mom grabs her head and reminds her that Arietta is already 18, and it's time to get married. Mom reminds her of the girl's debut 2 years ago, but because her daughter stays at home, she won't have any boyfriends. Arietta tries to reassure her parents by saying that it doesn't matter what time she gets married, she would live peacefully in Philiotia with her parents. The mother asks her daughter to listen to her and explains that the girl cannot always live with her parents. Parents believe that the heroine should leave her home to start her own family, but Arietta protests. Mom stops the heroine because getting married is good for her own safety. The heroine clenches her fists when they tell her that she has already been given enough freedom, and she hardly wants to give it up. The father, having asked what his wife plans to do with Arietta then, and hearing that he proposes to send her to Levante to Aunt Lillian, considers this a bad idea. The mother then offers to send her daughter to the capital instead of Levante, just to find a groom. Finally, the opinion of Arietta is asked, who sits in horror at the table, unable to eat after such news. In the backyard, the sounds of an axe were heard. Someone was chopping wood. The maids gossiped about 11542's handsome voice and physique as they watched the guy work. Arietta crept up behind the girls and asked whose wonderful face they were talking about. The heroine sees Edwin, covered in sweat, and wonders if they are discussing him. The maids deny everything and quickly run away from the yard, avoiding unnecessary questions from the lady. The girl approaches the slave, thinking that any sighted person will be shocked by his beauty. Arietta sat down on the ground in front of Edwin and laid her head heavily on her hands on her knees. Seeing the girl's excitement, the guy came closer and asked if she was okay. The heroine silently looked up at the guy, remembering her mother's words that she needed to stay away from the slave. Arietta thinks she clung to Edwin so much that she herself would get tired of someone so clingy. The girl understands that he does not directly show irritation, and she cannot understand the slave's thoughts. What if he will only be happy if she no longer follows on his heels? Edwin knelt down next to the girl and called her, tearing her away from her tense thoughts. Arietta glanced at the guy, and he asked if she could answer the question he asked earlier. The lady realized with horror that when she had admired Lord Redford, she did not at all want him to be unhappy. The girl reached out to Edwin's cheek and thought that, being a lord, he would not even look at someone like her. Arietta feels disgusted with herself for feeling selfishly relieved when he is with her. Edwin runs his hand through his hair and says that it has grown too long and needs to be cut today. Remembering how the maids praised Edwin's hair, the lady tells the slave to hold off on cutting it. The hero is surprised by the news that the girl is going to her aunt in Levant tomorrow. Arietta says that Aunt Lillian is a widow without children, and she is lonely, so she wants to see her niece as soon as possible. Edwin doesn't know what to say, so he just stands there and listens to the girl's story. The heroine reassures the guy with the words that she will not be with her aunt for long, only 3 or 4 months, and maybe she will return before the fall. Arietta says how worried her mother is about her daughter's lack of a fiancé, but the girl herself thinks that nothing will change from a trip to Levante. The heroine remembers how last time she wasted her time, like a lonely flower on the wall. Edwin imagines that if Arietta finds her passion in Levant, she may not return to Filioche. The girl is surprised by this statement and asks the guy not to send her away so early, even if he is tired of her. Arietta smiles awkwardly and wonders what kind of crazy gentleman would want to marry someone like her. After all, there will be many beautiful and elegant ladies around her at the balls, and her partner does not immediately become a groom, so the heroine will return in any case. The lady smugly asks if Edwin is happy to be free from her attention for a while. With a sad smile, Arietta adds that the guy should not relax too much, because she will be sad to see him living happily ever after. Edwin wants to say something, but he is too upset to formulate his thoughts properly. All that the slave gives is a request for the lady to be careful on the road. Arietta closes her eyes and says that when the leaves turn red, they will definitely see each other. Edwin sits thoughtfully on the sofa in his room, remembering how he ended up in Filioche. In the guy's memories, Marquis McKnight asked him not to be offended by His Highness, because he had his share of cruelty. The Marquis promised that Edwin's affairs would go better in Filioche, because at least he would not be recognized there. The slave thinks that the king is mistaken, and nothing will change. The evil nobles will continue to mock him, The only difference is the level of pain. Edwin remembered how Arietta, on a horse ride, said that she was very lucky that he was now with her, and that the guy was the main success in her life. The hero rubs his hands, repeating out loud the girl's words about luck and remembering their conversation during the day. Edwin replays in his head the lady's speech that she will only waste time in Levant, because no one will want to marry someone like her. The guy again sees the image of Arietta and how she calls him by name, because this shortens the distance between them. The slave is embarrassed by these memories, and the realization comes to his mind why he does not want the lady to leave Philiotia. Arietta sits in the warehouse and pretends to read a book, but in reality she is spying on Edwin. The guy notices this, and without turning around, asks what the heroine needs from him. The heroine claims that she is simply reading a book, because a real reader does not care where to read. Edwin notices that the lady is holding the book upside down, but even here, the heroine makes an excuse by saying that most people read it that way. Arietta changes the subject, asking if the guy wants her to cut his hair, despite the fact that she herself forbade him. The hero sat down on one of the boxes in the barn, and the heroine began to sort through his locks to cut his hair. The girl stopped after cutting just one strand and told Edwin that she had finished it faster than she had planned. Having hidden what she had cut behind her back, Arietta quickly left so as not to answer the slave's questions. Having reached her room, the girl slammed the door and exhaled that she had avoided meeting someone from the house. Arietta put a lock of Edwin's hair in the pendant and regretted that she was ashamed to ask him for it herself as a sign of the lady's departure from home. Looking at the pendant, the girl thought that she could stay in Levant for more than 4 months. The heroine looks out the window at her home yard, not believing that she has to leave when Lord Edwin is here. The real Edwin turned out to be significantly different, in contrast to her dreams, just as handsome, but no longer a prince on a white horse. Arietta notes that despite all the torment she has experienced, the guy always takes care of her. Edwin sat in the warehouse with his hair down, looking at his hands and listening to his heartbeat. The heroine squeezed the pendant and imagined that she was talking to the Lord, but could not say anything other than his name. As the family sends Arietta off on her trip, Hugo asks his sister to remember to write letters home. The girl tells her brother to obey his parents and not get into trouble, but the boy says that without her, there will be no problems. Mom asks the heroine to be careful in Levant and convey her congratulations to Aunt Lillian, and her daughter wishes her parents health. Before getting into the carriage, the girl turns around to see Edwin for the last time. The heroine sees only the butler and a couple of maids bowing goodbye to the lady. The carriage left Filioche, and the girl's house was left behind and in the past, and somewhere there was a slave who had not said goodbye to the girl. Night fell. The carriage was still driving along the road in some forest. Arietta looked out the window, hoping that the drive would not be long, because she was tired from the day on the road. The coachman stopped the carriage and said that they would stay the night in a house for travelers, not as good as a hotel, but with everything they needed. The heroine is in a panic that she will have to spend the night in some house in the forest. The girl got out of the carriage and stands, horrified at where she will have to spend the night today. The coachman asks the lady to quickly come into the house because it is getting cold, and he goes into the building first. Arietta turns around at the strange sound and sees a cart with her things and 2 porters hired by her father. Without taking her eyes off the men, the girl thinks why her not very rich family sent more than one assistant with her. In the end, the heroine decided not to overthink it and simply went to the house for travelers. In bed, Arietta could not sleep because of the cold and dreamed of a cup of hot tea. The heroine came to the realization that she had taken tea leaves with her from Filioche, and they should lie in the cart. The girl went outside and began looking for tea in the cart, but could not find it. As soon as Arietta saw the box with tea leaves, someone in a black robe appeared behind her. The guy grabbed the girl from behind and covered her mouth with his hand so that the girl would wake up the servant by screaming. Looking up, the heroine saw Edwin, already apologizing for scaring the lady. Arietta turns to face the guy, asking several times if it's really him. The heroine moves Edwin's face closer to hers and makes sure that he is definitely a slave. The guy says that he is not in Philiotia because he will accompany the lady in Levant. The girl thinks that Edwin himself would avoid big cities, given his background, so he could not volunteer for the trip himself. Arietta upsetly says that the father should have asked the slave's opinion before sending him somewhere and respected the guy's opinion. The girl apologizes for her father and says that he is not usually like this. She herself does not understand his decisions. The heroine turns to the house and promises to talk to her father, and Edwina is sent back to Filioche. The guy stops the girl by the hand and says that he is not going against his will, but by his own choice. Edwin upsetly asks the lady not to send him back, but the girl reminds him that he might be recognized in Levant. The guy says he doesn't care about people because there is something more important. The slave says that the most important thing for him is Lady Arietta, but the girl thinks that he is simply calling her by name. Edwin, relieved that the girl did not understand, says that he did not want to say anything important. Arietta arrived in Levante, and servants from her aunt's estate helped unload her luggage. Lillian ran out to greet her niece and asked why she hadn't visited her aunt in 2 years. The heroine, already pressed to her aunt's chest, recalled that it was she who promised to come to Filyosh. The aunt asks if the mover she brought will stay with the girl, and finds out that only the blonde one will stay. Lillian looks thoughtfully at the slave who is carrying boxes with the lady's decorations. Arietta presses her hands to her chest in the hope that her aunt did not recognize Lord Edwin in the guy. The aunt concludes that the slave will need a room and orders him to be placed in the servant's dormitory. The heroine exhales and thanks her aunt for her kindness to the servant. Levante was famous for its aristocratic parties. They were considered the most first class in the kingdom, and many rich people came from the capital just to attend them. Arietta, sitting in the hall, says with annoyance that she will soon have to accompany her aunt to a party of the local countess in order to establish connections and find a groom. Edwin, sitting opposite, says that this is wonderful, which surprises the lady because she does not understand what is good at the ball. The guy reasons that at the countess's birthday party, most of the guests should be women, and Arietta can learn manners from them. The heroine jumps up because the slave, in her opinion, is slandering right in front of her face. The girl asks if Edwin thinks she's a fool, but the guy doesn't understand why she decided that. Arietta clasps her hands in her lap and asks if the guy cares about her behavior, if he thinks she will disgrace the family. Remembering that the slave always found fault with her, the girl asks him to forget about the previous questions, because the guy still has the wrong idea about her. Crossing her arms over her chest, Arietta says that if she wants, she can amaze Edwin with her behavior like an ideal lady. The hero says that the lady is already ideal for him, but the girl does not understand what he means and asks again. Edwin, looking at the girl, repeats that Lady Arietta, in his opinion, is ideal, so there is no need to remind him of this. The girl asks how she can be perfect if he himself just said that she needs to learn manners, to which she receives the answer that the slave just needed to give her a reason. Arietta looks in surprise at the guy who said he wished the lady would never change. Remembering how the girl sincerely smiled at him, Edwin gloomily clarifies that he does not want to see changes in the girl for as long as possible. Broken by the thought that Arietta will soon get married, the guy says that it is impossible for her not to change. The heroine, frightened by the guy's condition, asks if he's okay and what he just meant. Edwin raised his head to the lady and asked her to forget what he was talking about a minute ago. In front of him, the guy saw an embarrassed girl in a house dress, and his heart began to beat faster at the sight of her. At the countess's birthday, the women discussed how good the mistress's son is. It's a pity that he's single. Lillian turns to the heroine, who is not even listening to the conversation, and reveals that she is also single. The girl looks at the tea in the cup and wonders what Edwin meant during the conversation that evening. Arietta takes a sip of tea, coming to the conclusion that the Lord's words are very similar to a declaration of sympathy. The ladies return to Lillian's estate, which was not much larger than the heroine's house in Filyosh. Arietta reasons that there is not a drop of nobility in her, so Edwin, who is the noblest of all, cannot like her. The girl is rushing about. Suddenly, the guy said this because he knows that he is attractive to her, but cannot find the answer to this riddle. The heroine suddenly leaves her room, determined to interrogate Edwin. As Arietta approaches the backyard, she hears the maids discussing whether they should approach the handsome guy. The maids decide that the slave is too handsome for them, and approaching him would be an instant disgrace. The heroine freezes in place, realizing that she has already seen a similar scene at home quite recently. Finally, the girl sees Edwin standing in the middle of the courtyard, sweating and with his hair down. Arietta attracts the attention of the maids, scaring them, and asks why they are not working. The girls ask again, and the heroine reminds that now is the busiest time. The maids run away while Arietta glares after them, crossing her arms over her chest. Edwin says he thought for a second that this wasn't the lady he knows, and the girl wonders if he was disappointed. The guy reports that he was afraid that the lady would scold him too, and Arietta asked not to scold him. The heroine is angry because Edwin continues to make fun of her when she asked her to stop, and warns that she is terrible in anger. The guy calmly says that he will stop bullying if the lady wants it that way, which amazes the girl. Arietta sighs in frustration that the truth cannot surpass the guy in anything. Edwin was upset that the girl did not see the opportunity to surpass him even once in her life. The heroine comes closer to the guy and stated that she wants to ask something, but stops. Arietta imagines how stupid she will look asking if Edwina likes her. In the girl's mind, the guy will look at her with disgust because he doesn't look like a crazy person. Edwin approached the lady to bring her back from her thoughts to the real world and find out what she wanted to know. The embarrassed girl's gaze falls on the guy's unbuttoned shirt and the manly chest under it, and the heroine becomes more embarrassed. Arietta blushed, thinking about what it would be like to be in Edwin's arms. The guy asked if the girl was okay, and she came to her senses and was horrified by what she was doing right in front of the slave. Not to be silent, Arietta blurted out the question of why she hasn't seen Edwin lately, because she's worried that something has happened to him. The guy reminds him that he stays away from the girl because Lillian might recognize him if she sees him often. The heroine understands how stupid her question was, and does not remember how she could forget about such an important reason for a slave to hide. The girl says that it's not that she doesn't see Edwin, but her question. Edwin declared his readiness to finally hear the lady's question, but she was afraid to say right away. She was ready to faint or fall into a hole just to get away from this conversation. A month had passed since Arietta's arrival in Levante, during which time she had attended several balls and small gatherings with her aunt. Each time, Lillian tried to set up her niece with numerous single gentlemen. Thanks to her efforts, 3 men showed their interest in the heroine. However, after several meetings with Arietta, they lost interest, and Lillian did not understand what the problem was. One of the suitors told his aunt that the girl was not at all interested in him. All the time they spent together, the heroine was thinking about something else. Her reaction to the conversations was rather detached. Arietta tried to justify to her aunt that those guys were good, but none of them attracted her attention. The aunt takes the girl by the shoulders and says that she is not in a situation to find fault, because few people marry for love. The heroine says that she does not want to marry an unloved person, and it would be better to live alone. Arietta stands by the tree while Edwin sweeps the ground and says that her aunt is upset, and it is his fault, because the girl could not concentrate on the gentlemen when they came. Edwin does not understand his guilt and continues to work, but the girl says that he will not be able to escape. The heroine reminds that the guy every time interfered with her meetings with her boyfriends, saying that a letter had arrived from Filioche, or that her aunt was not doing well. The guy also hinted that the lady had something on her face, that the knot on her back was untied, and because of this, Arietta was very tense in her conversation with the gentleman. The girl, crossing her arms over her chest, asked how she should have behaved with them in such situations. Edwin coldly replied that if men could not cope with this, then they could not cope with the character of ladies. Arietta opens her mouth at the guy's impudence, but cannot object to him. When asked why the hero behaves this way, has fun, or competes with them, he replies that he is simply greedy. The next day, the girl walks into her room, and something catches her eye. On the edge of the coffee table lies a white envelope with a red stamp, which was sent by the heroine's father. Arietta takes the letter and sits down on the sofa, wondering what new things could happen in Filioche. After reading the unpleasant message, the girl does not want to believe that what her father wrote is true. The heroine runs into Edwin's room and asks to urgently talk to him. Arietta shows the letter from Filioche and invites the guy to familiarize himself with the contents. Edwin closes his eyes sadly and says that he knows what this letter is about. The girl shouts that it turns out that the father did not send the guy to Levante, but he simply ran away, alarming the whole family. Arietta shouts that a person with a slave mark cannot move freely, and Edwin knows this well, and it is very dangerous to be listed as a fugitive. According to the letter, Edwin had not been seen for some time, and the family was worried. The heroine's father, given his daughter's good relationship with him, mustered up the courage to write to her about this. Arietta thought that Edwin was sent by his father because he told her that he went with her by choice. The heroine could not even imagine that he had run away. The heroine screamed for the guy to say something about this already. The girl threw the crumpled letter onto the floor, and it fell near the slave's feet. Arietta began to cry and covered her face with her hands, repeating that she did not understand why Edwin would do something so reckless. The hero wanted to touch the lady's hair, but stopped and removed his hand. Edwin knows that for escaping, at best, his hand will be cut off. At worst, he will be beheaded. The guy is still bound by the laws of Brimdel, because in his heart, he considers himself the last surviving Redford. Edwin was trained as the heir of a family loyal and devoted to the kingdom, and was taught from childhood to love his country. Even when the guy lost everything and fell to his knees, he followed the prince's last order without arguing. But at the same time, he refused to follow those who called what happened unfair and extended a helping hand. Usually, Edwin's emotions did not dominate his reason, except for the moment when Arietta was about to leave for Levante. From the moment he met the lady, the guy forgot what it was like to be himself. Edwin remembered how joyfully the girl called him by name, and understood that he did not want to be forgotten and lose Arietta. The guy silently looks at the angry girl, thinking that escape is his own desire and not Redford's personality. As the heroine looks at the slave, he realizes that he wants to stay close to her, regardless of the price that must be paid. They stood there in silence, because Edwin, as a slave, could not convey his feelings to Arietta, no matter how much he wanted to. The heroine looks at a bouquet of blue flowers in a vase by the window, and thinks that the guy hasn't brought them for a week. The girl leaves the room and is touched when she sees a purple flower brought by a slave at the threshold. Arietta approaches Edwin, who is sitting by a tree, and says that flowers are not enough for her because she would like to see him. The girl smiles, reasoning that if this happens again, she will give him a sad life. The guy, sitting on the grass, admires the heroine in a simple house dress. Auntie runs up to Arietta with an invitation to Count Shanks's grand plan. Lillian reports that it's time to throw out the old dresses and has already agreed with the tailor to take her niece's measurements to sew a new dress. The heroine wanted to refuse, but her aunt did not allow it, because the ball would be full of beautiful and young lords. Already sitting in the carriage, the girl was thinking how much it cost her aunt to order a dress for her. Edwin stopped the coachman closing the door of the carriage and asked where the lady was going. Arietta says that her aunt is sending her to the city to take measurements for sewing a dress. The guy suddenly asks if he can go with the heroine to personally make sure she is safe. The girl giggles, saying that she is going to a clothing store, not to the battlefield. Edwin silently waits for the lady's answer. His face shows that refusal will not suit him. Understanding the guy's stubbornness, Arietta invites him to sit next to him if he doesn't complain about boredom. Edwin gets into the carriage and agrees to the terms, and the girl notes that he looks like a puppy. The carriage arrived in the city. The heroine quickly completed all the business in the boutique. Arietta is looking for Edwin on the street because he did not want to watch the tailor's work with his own eyes. The heroine decides to wait for the guy at the carriage, but collides shoulder with a brunette in a blue dress. The stranger asked for forgiveness and turned out to be an attractive young lady. Confused by such beauty, Arietta watched the departing girl. The heroine met the coachman and asked if he had seen the guy who had arrived with her. The girl could not get the amazing stranger out of her head. The heroine began to wonder who she was. Unexpectedly, Arietta thought that even Edwin would fall in love with such a beauty. The heroine wanders down the street, still embarrassed by thoughts about Edwin and that stranger. The girl looks around in confusion to finally find the guy and return home. Arietta sees not Edwin, but the lady she recently came across. The brunette turns around, and the heroine decides that she is looking for something. A stranger stands in the middle of the street and does not see that a messenger on a horse is rushing towards her from the side. The lady does not notice the horse even after the rider shouts a few meters away from her. Arietta, seeing this, runs to the girl and knocks her out from under the horse's hooves, and they fall to the ground together. The messenger galloped away, and the ladies remained on the ground in torn and dirty dresses. The stranger jumped up and apologized for the fact that the heroine had to suffer and ruin her dress because of her. Arietta told the girl not to worry, because she had jumped without thinking and helped her up. The lady said that she owes her life to the heroine and does not know how to thank her, so she bows. Arietta asks what the stranger was looking for, since she was so keen on the search. The stranger says that she was probably mistaken, because it is unlikely that she saw someone whom she had not seen for so long. The girl finally introduces herself as Viviane Enterichkanel, and the heroine also says her name. Arietta notes that Viviane's last name seems familiar to her. The brunette fearfully asks if her new acquaintance is Mackenzie from Philiotia. The heroine was very surprised that the lady knew her little-known family and their place of residence. Finally, Edwin finds Arietta, runs up from behind and takes her hand. The guy puts his hands on the girl's shoulders and asks what happened to the heroine, why she wasn't at the boutique while Viviana is watching. Suddenly, Edwin and the lady recognize each other and call each other by name. The girl rushes into the Lord's arms and says that she missed him very much. Viviana begins to cry, looking at the guy's face while he just looks in surprise. Arietta, watching the scene, finally remembers where she knows the surname Richconnell. The heroine remembers all the pain she felt when she learned about her engagement to Lady Richconnell. The girl moves away from the couple, but Edwin steps away from Viviane to ask his lady what happened. The guy saw that the girl was shaking and could not come closer to her. Edwin was very surprised by this reaction and simply watched the heroine go into the distance. Arietta sits in the carriage and looks out the window, waiting for the ride to begin. The hero sits opposite her, does not dare to say anything, and remembers Viviana. When Edwin first came to her, the girl asked with a smile why he had appeared. The Lord looked at her, thoughtful, as if he himself did not know how life had brought him here. It all started with the prince telling Edwin and his father about what a beautiful daughter the Marquis of Richcanel had. The prince says that Viviana seemed to him similar to Edwin in her aura. The hero's father argues that many people courted the girl, but she has been rejecting everyone for a long time, and his son can try to meet her. Edwin coldly agreed with his father and went to Viviana. At the first meeting, the guy realized that she and the lady were similar in that they put family above their own interests. Edwin gets down on one knee and proposes to Viviana, even though this is their first time meeting. The girl accepts the offer without hesitation, saying that it is an honor for her. Edwin proposed to a girl he had never seen before because of her noble, selfless, and proud behavior. Soon after the engagement, the hero was sent to the border, and a year later he ceased to be Redford, and the engagement was dissolved. Edwin mentally asked Viviane if their relationship was mutually beneficial, without romantic feelings. The hero caught Arietta in the yard to finally talk, but the girl asked to talk later. The heroine could not look Edwin in the eyes, and looking away, lied that she was too tired. The guy looked after the lady, realizing that she had been avoiding him all day. If Arietta noticed him, she would ignore him and run away, or turn around and walk back. Edwin understood that Viviana was the reason for this behavior, and recalled the meeting in the city and the lady's reaction to her. The days when a guy chatted happily with a girl are gone, and now seem a thing of the past. Edwin puts his hand to his chest, thinking that Arietta gave him warmth and he began to appreciate it, but now she is apparently tired of him. The guy, standing in front of Aunt Lillian's house, thinks whether the lady wants to return everything as it was, or become strangers to each other. Arietta stretches in her chair after finishing her book and thinks it's time to go to bed. Someone knocks on the door, but does not answer the girl's question about who came so late. The heroine once again anxiously asks who came to her. Arietta remembers that the maid Heather has poor hearing, so she takes the candle and goes to the door. Opening the door, the girl saw Edwin in the light of the candle and was about to lock herself. The guy didn't let her do this and held the door with his hand. Edwin said that there would have been problems if someone else had come and opened the door wider. Arietta moved further into the room, shouting that the slave did not understand what he was doing now, but the guy entered. The girl pulls away and says that she did not allow Edwin to enter and asks him to leave now. The guy confidently refuses and asks the lady to finally talk to him about Viviana. Arietta remembers the brilliant lady and says that she does not want to talk about her now. Edwin asks when the right moment will come because it is important for him to clarify the situation. The slave with a cold look says that he wanted to wait for the lady to come to him, but now he can't. The heroine asks to wait a little longer, but the guy comes closer and says that his patience is over. Arietta steps back in a panic and screams for the guy not to come closer. Edwin sadly asks if the lady thinks he will hurt her and assures him that he would never harm the girl. The guy advances, and the heroine moves away, saying that this is not at all like Edwin's usual behavior. The girl runs into the wall, and the hero, who has driven her into a corner, repeats that patience has run out. Arietta drops the candlestick and closes her eyes, not understanding what is happening. The heroine slowly opens her eyes, and at this time the guy stands on one knee at her feet. Edwin bows his head and asks to hit him or call for help if the lady wants. Arietta is embarrassed and surprised, and the guy asks to simply listen to the fact that nothing happened and cannot happen between him and Viviana. Edwin says that he was actually engaged to this girl for some time. However, this was only for the sake of their families, the Redfords and Richcanel. The guy swears that nothing happened between them because this happened before he met Arietta. Still on his knee, Edwin says that even on the day of meeting Viviana, he did not immediately notice her because his attention was focused on the lady. The heroine kneels down closer to the guy and asks why he is telling her this. Arietta remarks that Edwin's story sounds like an excuse, and the guy agrees because he doesn't want the lady to hate her. The girl lowers her head and asks how you can hate such a guy. The heroine covers her face with her hands and agrees that nothing bad happened, and she didn't avoid meeting the guy because of him. Arietta, with horror in her eyes and her hands over her face, said that she was afraid of herself that day. After all, if he had found out about her thoughts that day, he would definitely have hated her himself. The heroine thought whether Edwin still loved Viviana and what she should do if he did not want to return to Filioci. Arietta understands that even if he doesn't want to, his patrons are her family, and the heroine can lock him up and force him to be with her. The girl with anger on her face thinks that she doesn't care what others say, because Edwin belongs to her. The heroine saw her facial expression in the reflection of the window and was horrified, realizing her thoughts. Arietta cries, realizing that she almost did to the guy what cruel people did before her. The girl sits bashfully opposite the guy, thinking that as much as she didn't want to keep her thoughts secret, she should be more honest with him. The heroine burst into tears. It seemed to her that now Edwin would not want to communicate with her. The guy puts his hand on the girl's palm and asks to look at him. Edwin makes eye contact and tells the lady that she has done nothing wrong and has nothing to apologize for. Arietta continues to cry, explaining that she wanted to limit the guy's freedom, just like she was no different from the people who bullied him. After a short silence, the slave asks the girl to lock him up and torture him if that's what she wants. The guy says that he doesn't mind if Arietta does this to him, and she is surprised with tears in her eyes. The girl asks him what he's saying, but not a drop of doubt or lie is visible on the guy's face. Edwin takes and kisses the lady's hand, saying that he recognized her as his only mistress. Still holding the girl's wrist, the guy asks her to never doubt and use him as a devoted servant. Later, Arietta learned that such an oath is given by a knight to his master, and although she did not fully understand Edwin's intentions, she understood his emotions. During the tea party, the butler brought Aunt Lillian seasonal invitations to events. The woman is trembling from the letter, which she definitely did not expect to see in the morning mail. Arietta shows Edwin this letter and says that Richkanel is inviting her to a masked ball next week. The guy asks why she was invited. The girl replies that her aunt was also surprised. It is very difficult to get to Richkanel events. Even bribery does not help. Arietta takes a sip of water and says that this is probably thanks to Viviane for saving her that day. The girl assumes that Viviana wants to see not her at all, but another person from Lillian's house. Edwin reminds that there are no feelings between him and the Marquis's daughter, and the heroine agrees with him. Arietta sheepishly admits that she actually received another letter today. This message was written to the heroine personally by Lady Viviana, but the girl could not bring it here because it could fall into the wrong hands. The heroine burned the letter after reading it because it said so. Edwin continued to carry logs for the fireplace, asking if he needed to know about the contents of the letter. The guy says that if the letter doesn't talk about some kind of danger to Arietta, he's not interested in the contents. The heroine jumps up from her chair, exclaiming that the letter contains something important for Edwin. Without being distracted from his work, the guy says that since the letter is not addressed to him, he will trust the lady in this matter. Arietta wondered how to convince the slave of the real importance of this information. Finally, the heroine says that Viviana wants to see him, and the invitation was a pretext for this. Edwin stared straight ahead, saying that he shouldn't have heard that. Arietta says that, in her opinion, the guy should see her, because they were not able to have a normal conversation ahead of time. The guy interrupts the lady and asks if he should meet Viviane, and the girl freezes. Edwin turns to the heroine and asks if it was she who was unpleasant last time, or if she has already changed her mind. The guy says he will pretend he didn't hear anything and is going to leave the room. Arietta stops the guy with the phrase that Lady Viviana believes that the Redfords could have been unfairly accused. The heroine says that the whole incident with Edwin's family seems strange to the Marquis's daughter. The girl mentioned the count who staged the uprising, that he was sentenced to death after a month of imprisonment. However, Edwin's father, who did not arrange anything, was executed 3 days later, and the whole situation is strange. The guy turns around, hearing that something terrible is hidden behind the execution of the family. Arietta asked what the hero thought about this, whether the whole situation seemed suspicious to him. Edwin says that now he is not sure that he is not interested, because he also noticed a couple of strange things about what happened. The guy recalled that the victims were not even given a chance to prove their guilt, as if they simply wanted to erase the family from history. The hero rubbed the bridge of his nose and reasoned that it didn't matter anymore, because it was the decision of the king himself. The girl remembered that the guy's family had always remained loyal to the kingdom, and it didn't seem like Edwin was lying. Arietta says that she cannot leave the situation and asks the slave to talk to Viviana. Edwin asks if this is an order, which puts the girl in a stupor, and she says that her words are a request. Arietta rushes around the carriage and waits for Edwin to get dressed inside. The girl understands that she should have prepared more thoroughly and not forced the guy to get ready in a hurry. The heroine leans against the carriage and asks to tell him if the mirror she gave is too small. Edwin says that he is already ready, gets out of the carriage and asks if he looks good. Arietta remembers how handsome the guy is and says he took her breath away. The girl enthusiastically says that she doesn't have enough words to describe how wonderful he is. Edwin is embarrassed and says that the lady is exaggerating, saying that he looks better than her, who spent half a day getting ready. The guy asks if the lady likes his appearance and gets the answer that he would make any girl blush. Edwin clarifies that he wants to know exactly Arietta's opinion, which the girl is surprised at. The heroine says with a smile that she, of course, also likes the guy's outfit, and this makes him happy. Edwin puts on a masquerade mask and invites the girl to go to the ball. Arietta, with a guy on her arm, arrives at the masquerade party at the Marquis Rich Canal. The girl is surprised by the scale of the estate, because this dacha looks more like a castle. The butler approaches and offers champagne, and the heroine takes one glass. Arietta offers Edwin a drink, but he politely refuses, asking not to worry about him. The girl is worried that the guy might not want to drink before meeting Lady Viviana. The heroine takes off her mask to drink, and Edwin sees the girl's beautiful, embarrassed face. Arietta is amazed at the top-notch alcohol served at the parties of the rich. Edwin turns and shields the lady from the approaching man. The man who comes says that Lady Viviana wants to see Arietta and her companion. The guy and the girl were taken to the lady's chambers, and they entered her. Viviana, sitting on a chair by the window, greeted them and said that she was tired of waiting. Edwin closed the door to the room behind him, while Arietta admired the beauty of the hostess. Viviana thanked the guy for coming, because it must have been hard for him. The hero asked the lady not to address him formally, because he no longer belongs to the Redford dynasty. Confused, the girl declares that she will be careful, but she has nothing to hide in this room, especially since they were previously engaged. To remove the awkwardness, Arietta asks for more details on what is known about the Redfords. With a serene smile, Viviana asks to be left alone with Edwin. Arietta asked again, because she didn't understand why she should leave. Edwin said that he had nothing to hide from his lady, and if she could not be here, then the conversation was not important. Viviana gets up and explains that this is not what she meant, but that Arietta needs to leave for her own safety. The story involves the most powerful people in the kingdom, so the consequences if anyone finds out about the conversation will be dire. Arietta puts her hand to her chest and declares that she is ready to take any risk to help Edwin. Viviana states that sometimes it is better to remain ignorant, and if the girl were her person, she would never know. The hostess leaves the decision to Edwin because it will determine his future fate. The guy thought about it, because a lady wouldn't worry so much about trifles, and he doesn't want to harm Arietta. Arietta decides to leave the slave and lady after all, and is about to leave the room, and Edwin is already about to leave with her. The girl convinces him that he needs to listen to Viviane, and she will wait outside. The heroine leaves, and the guy is left alone with his ex-fiancée. Viviana asked the Lord to take off his mask since no one was watching them. The guy obeyed, and the lady said that now they had really met. The girl thought that Edwin had changed a lot, but now she saw the same Lord Redford in front of her. Viviana remembers how she used to wonder if she could one day close the distance between them by staying close. The girl embarrassedly says that she did not hope that she would have the opportunity to meet Edwin again. The guy clutches the mask in his hand and asks if they can get straight to the point since he doesn't have much time. Viviana sits down on a chair, asking if Edwin is in a hurry to see Lady Arietta. The girl notices that although she doesn't know the heroine for long, she can conclude that the Lord is very worried about her. Edwin says that the girl is very naive and does not understand what she might face. Viviana looks at the Lord carefully, thinking that he is no longer the same one she knew. Now she sees an emotional guy in front of her, but before she has never seen him care about someone so much. Viviana started the conversation and told Edwin everything she knew about the situation with his family. The guy thanks the girl and believes that it was not easy to get this information. The hostess says that she is helping Edwin for personal reasons. Viviana modestly concludes that helping is a way to say goodbye to the Lord. The girl let Edwin go because she herself had to return to the holiday, and the guy got up from the table, thanking her. Finally, Viviana asked if Arietta held a special place in the Lord's heart. Confused, Edwin gives a negative answer and goes to the door. The girl smiles, thinking that she did not notice an interesting detail in the guy. Lord Edwin turned out to be a terrible liar, because when he put on the mask, he burned with shame. At this time, Arietta was enjoying champagne standing against the wall in the ballroom. The heroine thinks that she acted selfishly by bringing Edwin here, because he did not want to know the truth. The girl twirls a glass of champagne by the stem, thinking what kind of person this king is, who is so cruel to the guy. Arietta walked into the middle of the hall, thinking that she should follow Viviane's advice and not interfere in this matter. If we put aside all doubts instead of the confrontation opened by Edwin, the guy will have to be in the role of a slave all his life. The heroine sadly thinks that she can devote herself entirely to this if it is necessary to help the guy. The girl is also afraid that the guy will distance himself from her after this whole story. Arietta, in order to get rid of obsessive thoughts, rushed along the corridor. The girl decided to have another drink and walked in the direction of the buffet without opening her eyes. A stranger came from the balcony, adjusting his belt, and called someone from there with him. He collided with Arietta, and the girl ended up on the floor, her mask falling off. The guy looked down at the heroine disdainfully and straightened his jacket. A girl ran from behind the curtain from the balcony, called the guy Sean and asked if everything was okay. The girl asked if everything was okay because it was loud, and Sean asked not to bother him in public. The couple discusses their future wedding while Arietta sits on the floor with sore knees. The girl whispers to Sean a question about who the lady in front of them is. The guy grins that he doesn't know her, which means she's either non-local or from an inconspicuous family. Only now does the heroine realize that her mask has fallen off and everyone can see her face. Sean lifts his mask and mockingly asks if this is what the girl is looking for. Arietta screams for the guy to give her the mask, but he is in no hurry. Sean lifts the girl to her feet by the wrist and says that they are both at fault for not looking at the road. The heroine pulls out her hand and declares that if the guy had not turned his head around, he would not have crashed into the person in front of him. Arietta says the first thing to check is not the clothes, but the person who fell on the floor. Sean adjusts his jacket again and mocks that his clothes are expensive, unlike the girl's dress. The heroine was stunned by the fact that the aristocrat called her poor. Arietta also grinned and stated that in Sean's case, it is not the person who wears the clothes, but the clothes. The phrase that this explained the guy's rude behavior made Sean twitch. The guy said that the lady just had no idea who she was talking to, but she interrupted him, saying that she was not interested. Arietta also humiliated Sean by pointing out his improperly buttoned shirt. The guy bashfully covered his belly with crooked buttons and did not know what to say. The heroine says that the things are expensive, but apparently the wearer did not have time to check whether they were put on correctly. Arietta also shames the girl, asking what fun they were doing on the balcony. Sean, furious, finally told the girl to stop. The guy swung at the heroine to hit her in the face. Arietta covered her face with her hands and closed her eyes, anticipating the blow. The heroine opened her eyes because she did not feel the blow and saw Edwin in front of her. Sean, perplexed, asked who the guy was, but the guy didn't answer. Edwin squeezed the stranger's wrist tightly, so much so that he screamed. The slave pressed the guy's throat with his hand to the wall, and Sean shouted that he didn't dare behave like that. Arietta asked Edwin to stop, and he obediently removed his hands from the guy. Sean peered into the stranger's face to understand who was hiding behind the mask. The guy saw the blond man's eyes behind the mask, hoping to recognize the man by them. Sean realized with fear that the eyes of the guy in the mask looked very familiar. Edwin and Arietta ran outside to get away from Sean and stopped in the garden. The heroine screamingly asked the guy what he was thinking about, because if not for the mask, people would have recognized him. The guy took off his mask and said that he no longer cared about being recognized. Arietta is outraged by Edwin's actions because people can see. The guy took the girl's hand, brought it to his chest, and confidently said that he really didn't care. The hero put his hands to Arietta's neck and asked if that stranger had wounded her. The girl turned away from the guy and said that something completely different was important now. Edwin asked if the lady really thought he would stand by when she was almost hit. Arietta states that nothing bad would have happened because a couple of blows would not kill her. The guy screams, how can she say such terrible things? Edwin is horrified, asking if the girl really thinks that a couple of blows will not kill her. The girl corrects herself, saying that she doesn't care if she gets hurt, but it will be bad if the guy is recognized. After all, then people will resort to severe punishment, because Edwin, as a slave, threatened the nobleman. The girl trembles, saying that the guy could be beaten with a whip, or have his hands and feet cut off, or even killed. The heroine freezes from the terrible things that she just had to say out loud, and the guy insists that he doesn't care. Edwin says that if anyone touches Arietta, he will break the offender's neck, no matter who he is. The heroine covers the guy's mouth with her palms and asks him to stop this topic. The girl says that she is afraid that someone might hear their conversation, and the guy becomes silent. Arietta, still covering Edwin's mouth, thinks that he is different from how she imagined him when they first met. At the first meeting with the girl, he seemed very cold, and she does not understand where this burning rage came from. Arietta suddenly realizes that she is the reason for the changes in the guy's character. The girl pushes the guy who doesn't understand anything away from her and looks at his handsome face. The heroine stands on her tiptoes, wraps her arms around Edwin's neck, and thinks that she will allow herself to do this only today. Arietta reaches out to kiss the guy, mentally asking if she can at least today be honest with her feelings. The couple hears a rustling behind them. Someone is walking towards them in the dark. The girl shyly moves away from Edwin and turns back. It turns out that the rustling was from a midnight bird, which decided to fly away from the branch at that moment. Arietta clutches her head, realizing what she just nearly did. The guy turns to the lady and asks what she wanted to do with him now. Suddenly, the butler comes running and says that he has a message from Viviana, and Edwin hastily puts on his mask. The servant said that the lady advised him to leave the ball as soon as possible and stay away from here. This is because one of the famous guests is extremely angry, and Vivienne is worried that the guests might get into trouble. Arietta calls out to Edwin, saying it's time for them to leave the event. The guy, without raising his eyes or asking questions, agreed with the lady. The carriage with the lady and the slave hastily left the Marquis's estate. Arietta thought everything was fine, and no one recognized Edwin, although Sean almost ruined everything. The girl turns her head, driving away thoughts and convincing herself that she won't see him again anyway. Edwin silently watched the lady's actions, not understanding her, while she thought about how awkward and stupid she had behaved in the garden. Lillian waved her fan nervously in front of her, thinking about her desire for Arietta to marry a gentleman from a good family. However, she did not expect to see such a famous figure as Sean, heir to the Duchy of Rovani, among the applicants. Aunt rushes around the room, wondering what Arietta is doing, since first there was an invitation from the rich Connells, then a visit to Rovani. The heroine, sitting in the reception area, is nervous and looks intensely at her interlocutor, asking how he found her house. Sean, lounging on the sofa, mockingly replies that it was as easy as shelling pears. The guy says that he knows a lot about the girl, and she, gritting her teeth, notes how impudent he is for coming to her after trying to hit her. Sean is surprised because he believes that Arietta deserved the hit. Even though he was drunk, it is her fault. The guy smiles boorishly because the girl does not realize that his presence should be an honor for her. Arietta crosses her arms over her chest and asks, in this case, to leave a simpleton like her. Sean smiles madly and says he can't leave because the heroine has what he needs. The guy asks where the rude man is who almost strangled him at the ball. Arietta is shocked, but understands that she must under no circumstances be given the title of Edwin. The girl asks how she should know this, and the guest crosses his legs and pretends to be surprised. The heroine lies that the guy just protected her, but she has never met him before and laughs that Sean came only because of this. The guy rolls his eyes and says if he really has to believe it. Arietta is scared that her deception was successful, and Sean turned out to be not so stupid. Finally, the heroine was struck by the fact that the guest said the full name of the Lord, Edwin Benedict de Vere Redford. Sean looked at the heroine intimidatingly, once again saying that it was useless to lie, because he already knew everything. The image of the guy getting up from the couch floats in Arietta's eyes, and the girl is still trying to figure out how to lie. Sean stands behind the frightened heroine, rubs his hand, and says that he will have to resort to a different method. The guy shrugged and grinned at the fact that the arrogant Redford was serving someone like this girl as a master. He wasn't even recognizable. Arietta screams that Sean is wrong and she is not Edwin's master. The guest says that he doubts it, because Edwin probably thinks differently. Sean says that the disappearance of the Lord from the capital turned the capital upside down, because many people wanted to buy such a slave. At first, people thought that the guy had run away, but his then owner was silent, and the information was not disclosed even for a lot of money. And the Countess came down with an illness, because she was glad to have the man of her dreams as a slave, and in the end, she remained with her old husband. Sean says that only a fool like the Count would lose control of his wife. The guy remembers Lady Viviana, saying that perhaps he is the same. Sean, in hysterics, asks how such a slave could get to the Viscount's daughter, and where he is now. Arietta begs to leave Edwin alone, wants to apologize for that night, and asks to remember her old friendship with the Lord. Sean screams in anger because the girl called his relationship with the slave friendship. The anger is so strong that the guy hits the wall with his fist as hard as he can and tells the frightened girl that Redford makes him sick. Sean concludes, gritting his teeth, that he hates Edwin. The guy says that he doesn't feel sorry for the Lord. He has never felt so free, and he himself would brand this slave if there was an opportunity. Arietta steps back away from the madman and is amazed that he can say such a thing. Sean finishes off the girl with his knowledge that the slave willfully left Filioche. The heroine is amazed at how much this guy knows. She tries to say something. Sean reveals that the last escaped slave had his ankles cut off and left to be eaten by wild animals, and Arietta is in a panic. Realizing the danger of the guest, the girl began to cry and knelt in front of the guy, begging him not to touch Edwin. Arietta hears a noise and turns around to see who entered the room at that moment. An angry Edwin runs into the hall, and Sean grins, asking whether to call him by his name or slave number. The guest approaches the slave who called him Lord and touches him, calling him 11542. Sean punches the hero in the face with his fist so that he grabs his nose. Arietta runs up and stands between the guys, protecting the slave and asking what's going on. Sean smugly declared that he could not condone the impudence of a slave calling a nobleman a lord. The heroine, with tears in her eyes, said that this guy is the worst person in the world. Sean said he could have cut the guy's tongue off while Edwin was wiping the blood from his mouth. The guest, enjoying the scene, said how funny life is, that the once revered nobleman became a slave. Sean recalled how his father told him about the success of Edwin, who would soon be promoted to commander of the royal guard. I also remembered Viviana, who enthusiastically told me that she became Redford's bride without knowing him. Then Sean's hands were shaking, because he had spent so many years next to the lady, giving her his heart. Sean was drinking at the ball while listening to someone congratulate Edwin on his engagement. The guy slyly asked how the Lord won Viviana's heart, since she refused everyone. Sean was shaking with anger because Edwin said that they just thought the marriage was beneficial. He doesn't even think she's beautiful. The guy is furious that the Lord so easily got the one he desperately wanted. Sean wants to leave, but loses control of his legs, trips and falls in front of everyone. Before he gets up, Edwin approaches him and says that Lord Sean should leave so as not to disturb the others. Sean comes closer to Arietta and the guy, saying that no matter how much he turned up his nose before, now he is just a slave. The guest roughly took the girl by the hand, pulled her, and told her to move, because he wanted to deal with the slave. Edwin intercepts his hand, puts it to his chest, and asks the gentleman not to touch the lady. Sean pulls his hand back and asks if the slave will hit him if he touches the girl, and how dare he threaten the heir to the dukedom. Arietta asks the guys to stop, but is afraid to come closer to them. Sean, smiling, says that he was not sure whether he saw Edwin at the ball because he should not be in Levant. The heroine asks why the guy can't be outside her house in Filyosh. Sean reminds that the Redfords were executed for treason, and the son of a traitor cannot roam free without supervision. The guest talks about 3 conditions, due to which the Marquis McKnight gave up the slave to Arietta's father. The first rule was that you need to report on Edwin's every move at least once a month. The second stated that the slave could not be transferred to anyone for the next 30 years. And the third is that Edwin should not be allowed to leave the village under any circumstances. Sean says Arietta's father recently sent a false report because it said everything was fine. The guy assumes that he does not understand what threatens him if the Marquis McKnight and the Crown Prince find out about the violation of the conditions. And if the king, who still considers the slave a threat, finds out, his anger will overtake not only Edwin, but also Ariette's entire family. The girl cries, puts her hands on the chest of Sean, who came up to her, and asks to keep everything a secret. The heroine asks if the guy wants her to apologize on her knees, but he only pushes her and is indignant. Sean says that in this case, Edwin should kneel. Arietta, in the guy's arms, begs that she be the one to humiliate herself. The hero lets the girl go, gets down on one knee in front of the master, and asks to fulfill his lady's request. Sean enjoys this picture, seeing the slave's humiliation and the fear in the girl's eyes. The Lord shouts for the guy to go lower and presses his foot on his head. Sean presses even harder, so that Edwin slams his face into the carpet. Arietta runs up to the guy and gets down on the floor to help him get up. Sean leaves, not noticing the broken vase and asking the slave to remember where his place is. Edwin asks Arietta to look at him as she sits on the floor with her head buried in her knees. The lady raises her eyes in tears and examines the guy. The girl notices the hero's unbuttoned shirt, and on his open chest there is a slave brand with the number 11542. Arietta is overcome with emotional pain and sincerely apologizes to Edwin because he went to the ball and confronted Sean because of her. The girl cries that she is useless and could not protect him, and the slave says that she is not to blame. Edwin wanted to touch the heroine, but withdrew his hand, remembering Sean's words about where he belonged. The guy tells a crying Arietta that he doesn't care and he'd do anything for her. Sean gets angry and throws things around, saying that Vivienne should be grateful that he saved her from being labeled a traitor's bride. The lady angrily reminds her that the Lord promised not to touch Edwin if she accepted his offer. Sean wondered how she knew, since he made sure no one knew about his visit. The butler enters the room and says that the Duke wants to see the guy. Sean's father reveals that Valicia asked Brimdel for a diplomatic marriage, and the king is concerned about this. The guy doesn't understand the problem, because Valicia is a more developed country, and the marriage will be successful. The Duke explains that for their part, they nominated Prince Bernard. Bernard Sensil Shane Pascourt is the second son of King Valicia, known as a ladies' man and brawler. He constantly flirts with women, and because of his temper, he has become famous for the fact that he can grab a sword at every trifle, for which he is nicknamed the Prince of Disasters. The Duke says that the king cannot marry Princess Licia, known throughout Brimdel for her beauty and intelligence, to such a tyrant. But it is impossible to refuse, because people from Kustan in the north behave suspiciously, and there is no time for marriage games. The Duke argues that it would be good if the king had an illegitimate daughter. Sean suggests just making up a princess, but if the deception is revealed, Felicia's wrath cannot be avoided. The guy reminds his father of his influence and convinces him that if something goes wrong, they and their connections will easily hush up the situation. The Duke asks if his son has someone in mind, since he so boldly offers a replacement, and Sean remembers his new acquaintance Arietta. The heroine approaches Hugo from behind, swinging on a swing tied to a tree branch. A few days ago, the girl received a letter from Filioche, after reading which she immediately went home. Mom was surprised, and then burst into tears when she saw her daughter, but her father was not at home. He left on business as soon as he wrote the letter. The Viscount's wife cried sorely, because Hugo would have military duty at his age. The boy, wiping his eyes, turns around when his sister calls him. Hugo smiles, asks the heroine where she came from, says how much he missed her. The girl puts her hand on her brother's head and tells him that she knows what awaits him, and the boy freezes. Hugo says, with a fake smile, that after he goes to the border, they will see each other less often. Arietta is horrified to hear that her brother is being sent to the village of Bangola, which is currently at war. The boy asks his sister not to worry, because the service is his chance to prove himself. Hugo enthusiastically says that he will give it his all and bring glory to the Mackenzie family. The heroine's brother begins to shake, saying that he will definitely return to Filioche and admits that he is still scared. Arietta sits down and takes Hugo's hands as he says he's not as brave as his sister, but just a coward. The boy trembles and cries, admitting that he does not want to die. Edwin sees this sad scene and understands who is responsible for what happened. Arietta stands with the guy behind the barn, saying that the situation needs to be corrected. She cannot let Hugo go to war. The girl cries and asks Edwin why this happened. The hero says that the king's orders are undeniable. Even a nobleman cannot evade them. Perhaps there is still hope, because the king has the right to cancel his order. Edwin approaches the guy in the garden and thanks him for responding to his request at such a moment. Lord Duan notices that they haven't seen each other for a long time and asks how the slave is doing. He asks if he should apologize, because Edwin has suffered a lot and is probably disappointed in the Lord. The slave bows to Duan with his hand to his chest, says that he is not offended, and asks not to address him so formally because he has lost his title. The Lord says he was surprised that the guy approached him with a request, and Edwin asks him for a favor. The guy says that the son of Viscount Mackenzie, his master, was drafted into the army, but he is not yet ready to go to the front. Duan says that Kustan's warriors crossed the border, and they had to urgently gather troops, so many were called up. The Lord reports that there is no need to worry, because the knights are not sent to fight, but are assigned to the office not far from the capital. Edwin explains that Hugo is being sent to Bangola and is only 12. Duan is shocked that a child under 16 is sent to the front because it is strange. The slave bows and thanks the Lord for agreeing to do his best. Duan notices that the guy has changed a lot in 2 years, since he is so worried about the boy's fate. The hero looks up when the Lord asks if this is his only request. Duan is surprised that Edwin turned to Marquis McKnight for help to convey his request. The guy remembered how he asked the Marquis to help him if he knew the name Saranac and the prophecies that she made. Duan asks if Edwin wants to know about Saranac and how she knows about her prophecy. The Lord remembers Viviana and says that it doesn't matter to him how Paradise knows about this. Duan covers his face with his hand and admits that he did not want to meet Edwin because he was very afraid of seeing his reflection in his eyes. The Lord says he couldn't resist the prophecy and the cleansing, but his apology won't do any good. Duan asks Edwin to ask what he wants and thinks he will ask about the fall of the Redfords. The guy suddenly says that he has no questions because the Lord said correctly that it is useless. Even if the truth is revealed, it will not change anything. Duan says that no one will believe that the great family collapsed because of some prophecy. People called her Saranac. No one knew whether it was a given name or a surname. She suddenly appeared and became close to the royal family, and did not appear in public for a long time, so she was only a rumor for people. Saranac has never been wrong, and Duan's father, the king, blindly believes everything she says. The king no longer controls Brimdell. He is just a puppet in the hands of this fortune teller.